In 1966, during a lecture at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, Alan Watts said something that nobody understood at the time. He spoke about horses, not as metaphors, not as symbols of some abstract philosophical concept, as literal beings that would return to save humanity from itself. He said that Western civilization, in its rush toward mechanization, had severed something profound when it replaced horses with machines, that we didn't just lose a mode of transportation, we lost a mirror, a teacher, a bridge to a way of being that modern humans desperately needed but had forgotten existed. And he predicted that when humanity reached peak disconnection, when we became so lost in our own abstractions that we forgot what it meant to simply exist as conscious animals on a living planet, the horses would call us back. Not through force, through presence. He said there would come a time when people would seek horses not to ride them, but to remember something, to reconnect with a dimension of existence that technology can never provide. A dimension of pure being, of wordless communication, of existence grounded in the body rather than trapped in the mind. That time is now. Since 2020, something extraordinary has been happening. Across every continent, in cultures with nothing in common, horses are moving from the margins of modern life back to its center. Not as nostalgia, not as recreation, as medicine for a civilization dying from disconnection. Therapists report breakthrough results with horses that conventional psychology cannot explain. Veterans with PTSD, who've tried everything, find peace standing next to these animals. Autistic children who can't connect with humans form instant bonds with horses. Corporate executives attend equine leadership programs and have spiritual awakenings they can't articulate to their colleagues. And when you go back to Watts's lectures from the 1,960 seconds and 70 seconds, when you really listen to what he was saying about horses, about consciousness, about the disease of abstraction that would plague modern humanity, it all clicks into place with disturbing precision. Before we continue, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like, and comment where you are watching from. It helps us know how far our videos go, and also encourages us to create content for those who care for our horses, beyond just recreation. He saw it coming. He saw that we would build a world so dominated by thought, by abstraction, by simulation, that we would lose contact with the immediacy of existence. And he saw that horses, beings that exist in permanent presence, would become essential guides back to reality. In a 1968 lecture, Watts said, "The horse knows nothing of past and future. It exists entirely in the now." And when you are with a horse, really with it, not thinking about it, but feeling it, you are forced into that same eternal present. The horse will not tolerate your mental absence. It demands your presence, and in that demand lies its greatest gift. At the time, when horses were disappearing from daily life, when cars had taken over, when the future was all about technology and progress, these words seemed quaint. Romantic, perhaps, but irrelevant to the direction civilization was heading. Watts wasn't being romantic. He was being prophetic. He understood something that Western science is only now beginning to confirm, that horses possess a quality of consciousness, a way of being present that humans have lost. That they function as living reminders of what we've forgotten. That in their presence, the chattering mind quiets, the anxious future focus dissolves, and what remains is simple, immediate, embodied existence. And he predicted that as humanity's disconnection reached crisis levels, as our obsession with abstraction made us sick, we would be drawn back to horses. Not consciously understanding why, but feeling an inexplicable pull toward these beings. That pull is being felt by millions right now. Equine therapy centers have waiting lists measured in months. Spiritual retreats with horses sell out instantly. People who've lived their entire lives in cities, who've never touched a horse, feel a calling they can't explain. Videos of horses go viral across social media platforms. Documentaries about human-horse connection generate millions of views. Something is happening. A reconnection is occurring. And Alan Watts saw it coming 60 years ago. He said the horses would teach us the most important lesson civilization had forgotten, that consciousness is not something that happens only in the human head. That awareness exists in the body, in the present moment, in the wordless feeling of being alive. And that until we remembered this, we would remain trapped in our own mental constructions, suffering from a disconnection we couldn't even name. The horses are here. The prophecy is manifesting. And if you're feeling that strange pull, that inexplicable sense that horses have something to teach you, it's because Alan Watts was right. And your consciousness is beginning to remember what your culture taught you to forget. Let me tell you exactly what Alan Watts said about horses and why it matters now more than ever. Throughout the 1,960 seconds and early 70 seconds, Watts gave hundreds of lectures exploring consciousness, Eastern philosophy, and the psychological crisis of Western civilization. And woven throughout many of these talks were references to horses that seemed odd to his audiences. Why was this philosopher of Zen Buddhism and Taoism talking so much about horses? Because Watts understood something fundamental. He saw that Western civilization's greatest disease was abstraction, living in concepts rather than reality, living in thoughts rather than sensations, living in the past and future rather than the present. And he saw horses as the perfect antidote to this disease. In a 1967 lecture titled The Nature of Consciousness, Watts said, "When you approach a horse, you cannot fake presence. The horse reads you instantly. Not your words, not your intentions, not your thoughts. It reads your actual state of being. And if you are not present, if you are lost in mental abstraction, the horse knows it immediately and responds accordingly." He described horses as consciousness detectors, beings that mirror back to humans their actual state, not the state they pretend to be in or wish to be in, but what they actually are in that moment. And he said this quality would become invaluable, that as humans became more adept at deceiving themselves and each other, as we built entire lives based on performance and persona, we would need beings that could cut through all of that and reflect pure truth. In 1969, Watts recorded a lecture where he made his most explicit prediction. He said, "There will come a time when Western humanity realizes it has optimized itself into a corner. When we have all the technology, all the efficiency, all the productivity we dreamed of, and we are more miserable than ever. And in that moment of recognition, we will search desperately for a way back to simple being. And we will find our teachers, not in books, not in gurus, not in more technology, but in animals that never lost what we lost. The horses, above all, will call to us, because they represent what we most need to remember." At the time, this seemed like typical Watts, poetic and interesting, but not particularly practical. The late 60 seconds were all about the space race, computer development, the promise of technological utopia. Who needed horses? But Watts was looking further ahead. He was seeing the endpoint of the trajectory Western civilization was on, a world of incredible technological capability and profound existential emptiness. A humanity that had conquered nature but lost itself in the process. He predicted we would reach what he called the crisis of presence, a point where the inability to be present, to simply exist without constant distraction and stimulation, would create epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, and meaninglessness. And he said horses would emerge as healers of this crisis, not because they would do anything to us, but because their mere presence would invite us back to presence. Their way of being would remind us that another way exists. Watts also made more specific predictions about how this would manifest. He said that science would eventually validate what he was describing, that research would prove horses possess extraordinary sensory capabilities, that they can detect human emotional states through electromagnetic fields, through subtle changes in breath and heartbeat, through signals humans aren't consciously aware they're sending. In 1972, one of his last lectures before he died in 1973, Watts said, "The horse lives entirely in what Zen calls suchness. It doesn't think about being a horse. It doesn't try to be a better horse. It simply is what it is, completely, without reservation. And when you encounter that level of unself-conscious being, something in you recognizes it. Something in you remembers that you too were designed to exist that way, without the constant commentary, without the neurotic self-improvement project, just being. He predicted that this recognition would start small and build slowly, that a few people would discover the therapeutic power of horses, that word would spread, that research would follow, and that eventually, as the crisis of disconnection deepened, horses would become central to healing individuals and eventually healing culture. Everything he described is happening now. The crisis of presence is here. The epidemic of disconnection is undeniable. And horses are emerging exactly as he predicted, as teachers of something we forgot but desperately need. But Watts also warned about something. He said we would try to turn even this into another technique, another tool, another thing to master and optimize. That we would miss the point entirely if we approached horses as a means to an end, rather than as an invitation to a different way of being. The point, he said, is not to use horses to become better at being human. The point is to let horses show you that you were trying too hard to be human in the first place. That the natural state is much simpler, much more immediate, much more grounded in the body and the present moment than our anxious, abstract, future-focused modern consciousness. And if you can receive that teaching, if you can let it transform how you exist in the world, then you become part of the solution to the crisis Watts saw coming. You become someone who can navigate modern complexity without losing connection to immediate reality. Someone who can use technology without being used by it. Someone who can think abstractly when useful, but return to embodied presence when needed. That's what Watts meant when he said horses would save us. They wouldn't save us by doing anything. They would save us by being what they are, completely and unapologetically, until we remembered how to do the same. To understand why Watts saw horses as so significant, you need to understand his deeper philosophy about consciousness and what went wrong with Western civilization. Watts spent his entire career explaining one core insight from Eastern philosophy that the West had completely missed. The insight is this: you are not a separate self trapped inside a body, navigating a hostile external world. You are the whole process. You are what the entire universe is doing right here, right now, where you are. But Western culture teaches the opposite. It teaches that you are an isolated consciousness, a ghost in the machine, an observer separate from what you observe. And from this fundamental misunderstanding flows all of our suffering. Because if you're separate, you're vulnerable. You need to defend yourself, improve yourself, make yourself more than what you naturally are. You're in competition with other separate selves. You're at war with a nature that threatens you. You're constantly trying to control an external world to make yourself safe. And this is exhausting. It creates perpetual anxiety, because the separate self is always under threat, always insufficient, always needing to become something more. Watts said Western civilization had institutionalized this illusion, that our entire society was built around the assumption of separation. Education system, economic system, political system, all designed for separate individuals competing for limited resources. And the result? Epidemic anxiety, depression, addiction, and a profound sense of meaninglessness that no amount of material success could fill. Now, here's where horses come in. Watts observed that horses, like all animals, don't suffer from the illusion of separation. A horse doesn't think of itself as separate from its environment. It doesn't have an internal narrative about being a horse. It doesn't worry about whether it's a good enough horse, or compare itself to other horses, or strategize about its horse future. It simply exists, feeling, responding, being. And when you are in the presence of a horse, really present, not just physically there, but actually aware and attentive, something extraordinary happens. The horse's non-separation starts to infect you. Your own sense of being a separate self starts to dissolve. The mental chatter quiets. The anxious future focus releases. And what remains is simple, immediate, embodied awareness. You start existing more like the horse exists, in the now, in the body, in direct response to what is actually here, rather than lost in thoughts about what might be or should be. Watts called this getting out of your head and into your senses, and he said it was the most important therapeutic intervention possible for modern humans. Because the root of our suffering isn't external circumstances, it's being trapped in abstract thought, disconnected from immediate sensory reality. Horses force you out of abstraction and into immediacy. They won't engage with your persona, your story, your mental constructions. They only respond to your actual energetic state in the present moment. And that's incredibly valuable, because most of human society allows you to hide behind your persona. You can fake it. You can perform. You can maintain an image that has nothing to do with your actual internal state. But horses cut through all of that. They're like living lie detectors, but they're not detecting lies in your words. They're detecting incongruence in your being. When your internal state doesn't match what you're projecting, they know it, and they mirror it back to you, not with judgment, but with simple, honest response. Watts predicted that this quality would become therapeutically essential, that as modern life required more performance, more persona management, more disconnection from authentic feeling, we would desperately need beings that could reflect our actual state back to us. Because without that reflection, we can live our entire lives disconnected from ourselves. We can spend decades performing a role, maintaining an image, living someone else's expectations, and never realize we've lost contact with our own authentic being. Horses don't allow that. In their presence, you either become present yourself, or you experience the discomfort of your own disconnection so clearly that you're motivated to change it. Watts also connected horses to the body in a specific way. He said Western culture had declared war on the body, that we treated bodies as machines to be controlled by the rational mind, that we suppressed bodily wisdom, bodily feeling, bodily knowing in favor of mental abstraction. And he said this war on the body was literally making us sick, that all of our chronic stress, our psychosomatic illness, our depression and anxiety had roots in this fundamental disconnection from embodied existence. Horses, he observed, are perfectly embodied. They live entirely through their bodies. They think with their bodies. They know through their bodies. There's no split between mind and body in a horse. It's unified, integrated, whole. And when you work with horses, when you really engage with them, you're forced back into your own body. Because horses communicate primarily through body language, through energy, through presence. You can't connect with a horse from your head. You have to drop into your body, into your felt sense, into your own animal awareness. Watts said this dropping into the body was the key to healing modern consciousness. That once you remembered how to exist as a body, as an organism, as an integrated whole rather than a mind controlling a meat vehicle, everything shifted, the anxiety reduced, the disconnection healed. The sense of being alive returned. And he predicted that horses would become primary teachers of this return to the body, that their presence would invite humans back into embodied consciousness in a way that nothing else could. Because you can read books about embodiment, you can do yoga, you can practice meditation, all of that helps. But there's something uniquely powerful about being with another being that is completely, unself-consciously embodied, that lives the teaching rather than talking about it. Horses live the teaching, and in their presence, if you allow it, you start living it too. Not because you've mastered a technique, but because the horse's way of being is contagious. Presence invites presence. Embodiment invites embodiment. And slowly, naturally, you remember how to exist as what you actually are, a conscious animal, alive in a body, on a planet, in this moment. That remembering, Watts said, would save us, not just individually, but collectively. Because a humanity that remembers how to be embodied, how to be present, how to exist in simple awareness, would naturally create different systems, different values, different ways of living together. And horses, patient as they've always been, would be the teachers that reminded us, not through words, not through instruction, but through the simple, profound power of their presence. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening right now that validates everything Watts predicted. The explosion of equine-assisted therapy since 2020 is unprecedented. Programs that barely existed a decade ago now have waiting lists measured in months. Insurance companies are starting to cover equine therapy. Major hospitals are incorporating it into treatment protocols. Veterans Affairs facilities across the United States have added equine programs. This isn't fringe alternative medicine anymore. It's mainstream. And the results are forcing conventional psychology to pay attention. Combat veterans with severe PTSD who've been through years of talk therapy and tried every medication are finding relief through horses. Not gradual relief, breakthrough relief. In weeks, sometimes days. Why? Because horses access the trauma where it actually lives, in the body, in the nervous system, not in the verbal, narrative mind that talk therapy addresses. Watts predicted this. He said that Western psychology was too focused on thoughts and stories, on talking about problems rather than feeling them and releasing them. That horses would show us another way, a somatic way, a way that works with the body's intelligence rather than trying to override it with mental understanding. The research is catching up to what therapists have been observing. Studies now show that horses' heart rate variability synchronizes with nearby humans. That their electromagnetic field, which extends several feet from their body, can regulate dysregulated human nervous systems. That they can detect human emotional states with accuracy that rivals or exceeds trained human therapists. Watts didn't have this language, but he understood the principle. He called it resonance. He said that consciousness isn't isolated in individual brains, that there's a field of awareness that extends beyond the physical body, and that horses, because they're not trapped in abstract thought, are more sensitive to this field than humans typically are. So when you're near a horse, you're not just near a physical animal. You're in the presence of a highly sensitive consciousness that's reading your energetic state and responding to it moment by moment. And if your state is chaotic, anxious, disconnected, the horse mirrors that back to you, not with judgment, but with simple honesty. And that mirroring creates an opportunity. You can recognize your state, you can feel it, and you can choose to shift it. That's why equine therapy works when talk therapy doesn't, because talking about your anxiety doesn't necessarily change the bodily state of anxiety. But being mirrored by a horse, seeing your internal chaos reflected in the horse's response, feeling it in your body, that creates the conditions for actual somatic shift. Watts said this would happen, that horses would teach us to work with consciousness at the level of feeling and body rather than thought and narrative, and that this would revolutionize how we understand healing. But it's not just therapy. The corporate world is discovering horses. Leadership development programs with horses are exploding. Fortune 500 companies are sending executives to farms for equine-assisted leadership training. And these executives, these rational, results-oriented business people, are having experiences that challenge everything they thought they knew about leadership and human interaction. Because horses don't respond to your title. They don't care about your resume. They don't respect authority based on position. They only respond to authentic presence and congruent energy. So a CEO who's used to people deferring to them, who's built their success on projecting confidence and control, stands in a round pen with a horse and discovers that none of that works. The horse sees right through the performance to the actual internal state, and if that state is incongruent, if the external confidence masks internal fear or anxiety, the horse won't follow. This is devastating to the ego and transformative for consciousness, because it reveals that authentic leadership isn't about control or performance. It's about presence, congruence, and genuine connection. Watts would say this is exactly what modern leadership needs, that our organizations are run by people who are brilliant at abstract strategy but disconnected from present moment awareness and authentic relating. And that horses are teaching a different model, one based on being rather than doing, on presence rather than performance. The autism community has known about horses for decades, but it's accelerating rapidly now. Parents are reporting that their autistic children, who struggle with human social interaction, connect effortlessly with horses. Nonverbal children speak for the first time. Children who can't tolerate human touch spend hours brushing horses. Why? Watts would say it's because horses don't require the complex social performance that human interaction demands. They don't have hidden agendas. They don't use indirect communication. They're direct, honest, present. And autistic individuals, who are often overwhelmed by the social complexity and inauthenticity of human culture, find relief in the straightforward presence of horses. And then there are the spiritual seekers. People with no background in therapy or corporate leadership who are simply drawn to horses in search of something they can't name. They attend equine spirituality retreats. They do horse meditation workshops. They spend weekends at sanctuaries just being with horses. And they report mystical experiences, moments of complete presence, feelings of unity with something greater, sudden insights that bypass rational thought and arrive as direct knowing. Watts predicted all of this. He said that horses would serve as bridges to expanded states of consciousness, that their frequency, their energetic signature, would help humans access states of awareness that our busy, anxious, abstract minds typically block. He said, it wasn't magic, it was physics. Resonance. Two systems coming into harmony. And when your consciousness resonates with the consciousness of a being that exists in perpetual presence, you start to experience presence too. Not as a concept, but as your actual lived state. And once you've tasted that, once you've felt what it's like to exist without the constant mental chatter, without the anxious future focus, without the performance and persona, you want more. You start restructuring your life to create more opportunities for that state. That's the transformation Watts saw coming. Not a single dramatic awakening, but millions of small shifts. People having moments of presence with horses, and then carrying that into the rest of their lives. And as those moments accumulate, as more people experience this, culture starts to change. We're seeing it now. The values are shifting. Presence is being valued over productivity. Being is being valued over doing. Connection is being valued over performance. And at the center of this shift, quietly, patiently, are the horses, not evangelizing, not convincing, just being what they are until we remember how to be what we are. Here's what Alan Watts understood that most people miss. The horse prophecy isn't really about horses. It's about us. It's about what we lost and what we need to become whole again. Watts said Western civilization made a fatal error. We privileged abstract thought over direct experience. We trusted concepts more than sensations. We believed the map more than the territory. And gradually, over centuries, we forgot how to be in direct contact with reality. We lived in our thoughts about reality, in our theories, our models, our representations. We became so good at abstraction that we mistook it for the real thing. The result? A civilization of incredible conceptual sophistication and profound experiential poverty. We can think brilliantly about life while barely being alive. Horses represent the antidote. They are experientially rich and conceptually simple. They don't think about being horses. They are horses, completely, in every moment. And when you're with a horse, really with it, you're pulled out of abstraction, into direct experience. You can't think your way into connection with a horse. You have to feel your way. You have to be present. You have to drop the mental commentary and enter into wordless awareness. That's the teaching. Not a teaching that can be spoken, but a teaching that must be lived. Watts predicted that as our abstractions became more complex, as our technologies became more sophisticated, as our conceptual abilities expanded, we would become more desperate for direct experience, for something real, immediate, unmediated by screens or symbols or interpretations. And that desperation would drive us back to nature, back to animals, back to our own bodies, back to anything that could anchor us in present moment reality. Horses would be perfect for this because they're large enough to be impossible to ignore. You can't be with a 1,200-pound animal and remain entirely in your head. The horse's physical presence demands your attention. Its energy field is palpable. Its awareness is tangible. So horses become like gateways back to reality, back to direct experience, back to a way of being that doesn't require thought, interpretation, or analysis. Just presence. And Watts said that once enough people rediscovered this way of being, once enough humans remembered how to exist in direct contact with reality rather than lost in abstractions about reality, everything would change. Our systems would change. Because systems, based on abstract thinking without grounding in direct experience, create all kinds of problems. Environmental destruction happens when you think about nature as resources, rather than directly experiencing nature as the living system you're part of. Social inequality happens when you think about people as labor or consumers, rather than directly experiencing them as conscious beings like yourself. Abstract thought without grounding in direct experience is dangerous. It allows you to do things that your body, if you were actually present in it, would refuse to do. But direct experience, embodied presence, naturally leads to more wisdom. When you're actually present in your body, on this planet, aware of your interconnection with all life, you make different choices. Not because you should, but because harming the system you're part of feels like harming yourself. Horses teach this, not through concepts, but through the lived experience of interconnection. When you're truly present with a horse, you feel the connection. You feel that you're not separate. You feel that consciousness is not isolated in your skull, but extends, connects, participates in a field of awareness that includes the horse, the land, the air, everything. And that felt sense of interconnection changes everything. It changes how you treat animals, how you treat nature, how you treat other humans, how you treat yourself. That's what Watts meant when he said horses would save us. They would save us from our own abstractions. They would pull us back to reality. And in reality, grounded in direct experience, we would naturally make wiser choices. But here's the crucial part. You can't just understand this intellectually. Intellectual understanding is another abstraction. You have to experience it. You have to feel it in your body. You have to have moments of direct, wordless connection that bypass thought entirely. And that requires practice. Not practice to achieve something, but practice to remember something. To remember that before you learned language, before you learned concepts, before you learned to live in your head, you already knew how to be present. You already knew how to exist in direct contact with reality. Every child knows this. Watch a young child with an animal. There's no abstract thought, just direct engagement, immediate response, pure presence. Then we educate that out of them. We teach them to think instead of feel, to analyze instead of experience, to live in concepts instead of sensations. And by the time they're adults, the capacity for direct experience is buried under layers of abstraction. But it's not gone. It's just forgotten. And horses can help us remember. That's why this is happening now. The abstractions have reached their limit. The disconnection has become unbearable, and something in the collective consciousness is searching for a way back to direct experience. The horses are answering that call, not because they decided to, because it's what they are. They're permanent reminders of a way of being we forgot, and in our desperation, we're finally ready to learn from them again. Watts saw this moment coming. He prepared people for it through his lectures, his books, and his teachings. He was planting seeds for a time when those seeds would be needed. That time is now. The seeds are germinating. And if you feel the pull toward horses, toward nature, toward embodied presence, it's because those seeds are growing in you. You're remembering. You're waking up to direct experience after a lifetime of abstraction. And that remembering is the most important thing you can do. For yourself, for others, for the future of consciousness on this planet. But understanding all of this intellectually changes nothing. You need to embody it, live it, make it your actual experience, not just another idea in your head. That requires intentional practice. Daily reminding yourself to drop out of thought and into sensation, to feel your breath, to notice your body. To be present with what is actually here rather than lost in thoughts about what might be or should be. And that's why I created the Quantum Thinking Challenge, a 21-day program designed to reprogram your relationship with consciousness itself, to shift from living in your head to living in your body. From abstract thought to direct experience. From future focus to present awareness. Through daily practices, you'll train yourself to recognize when you're lost in abstraction and return to immediate reality. You'll learn to feel your own energetic state the way a horse feels it. You'll develop the capacity for presence that makes transformation possible. Participants report profound shifts. The anxiety that seemed permanent starts to dissolve. The restlessness quiets. A natural joy emerges that doesn't depend on circumstances. They start making different choices, not because they should, but because presence naturally leads to wisdom. Are you ready to move beyond intellectual understanding to actual embodied transformation? The link is in the first pinned comment. Because here's what Watts knew and what you need to understand. The crisis we're facing isn't external. It's not political, economic, or environmental at its root. Those are symptoms. The real crisis is consciousness. We've lost contact with reality. We're living in abstractions, and those abstractions are killing us and the planet. Horses offer a way back, but only if you actually engage. Only if you let them teach you what they came to teach. Only if you're willing to drop the performance, the persona, the mental constructions, and simply be present. That's the challenge. And it's not easy. Because your entire identity is built on abstractions. Your sense of who you are is a mental construction. And horses will expose that. They'll show you that the self you think you are is not what you actually are. That's terrifying to the ego, but it's liberating to consciousness. Because what you actually are is so much simpler, so much more immediate, so much more grounded than the complex identity you've constructed. You are awareness. You are presence. You are the conscious experiencing, happening right here, right now, in this body, in this moment. And horses can show you that, not through words, not through concepts, but through the direct experience of meeting another conscious being that isn't trapped in concepts, that just exists, fully, completely, presently. And in that meeting, if you allow it, you remember. You remember what you are beneath all the stories. You remember how to simply be. And that remembering changes everything. The future Watts saw wasn't about horses taking over or humanity going backwards. It was about humans, remembering a capacity we always had but forgot. The capacity for direct experience, for embodied presence, for consciousness grounded in reality rather than lost in abstractions. And he saw that horses would be catalysts for that remembering, that their presence would create opportunities for humans to wake up from the dream of separation, the dream of abstraction, the dream of the isolated self. We're in that awakening moment now. Millions of people are feeling the pull, having the experiences, questioning the abstract life they've been living, seeking something more real, more immediate, more grounded. And at the center of this awakening, silent and patient, are the horses, waiting, reflecting, inviting us back to what we forgot. The question is, will you answer the invitation? Will you let the horses teach you what they came to teach? Will you drop into direct experience? Will you risk the comfort of your abstractions for the aliveness of presence? Because that's what this moment requires. Not more thinking about presence, not more concepts about embodiment. Actual presence, actual embodiment, actual direct contact with reality. And horses can help, if you let them. If you approach them not as tools to use, but as teachers to learn from. If you're willing to be vulnerable, to be real, to drop the performance, and simply be what you are. That's the prophecy Watts gave us. That's the opportunity horses offer. That's the transformation waiting for you. We've reached the end of the explanation. Now comes the application. If you've heard this and it resonates, if you recognize yourself in the description of abstraction and disconnection, if you feel the pull toward horses and embodied presence, then you need to act. Not tomorrow, now. Start with this. Find horses. It doesn't matter if you've never been around them. It doesn't matter if you're scared. Find an equine therapy center, a rescue sanctuary, a farm that offers conscious interaction sessions. And go. Don't go to ride. Don't go to accomplish anything. When you're with the horse, notice everything your mind does to avoid actually being there. Notice how it wants to think about the experience instead of having it. Notice how it wants to achieve something instead of simply existing. Notice how uncomfortable simple presence feels at first. And then, gently, return to direct experience. Feel your breath. Feel your body. Feel the horse's energy. Be here. Completely. Without agenda. Do this repeatedly. Let the horse teach you through direct experience what no words can convey. Let it show you what presence feels like, what embodied consciousness feels like, what it's like to exist without constant mental commentary. And notice how that presence starts to affect the rest of your life, how you're less reactive, more grounded, more able to be with what is rather than constantly trying to change it into something else. If you can't access horses physically right now, work with the principle. Practice dropping out of thought and into sensation throughout your day. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel your breath moving. Feel the temperature of the air. Feel sounds rather than thinking about them. Every time you do this, you're strengthening the capacity for direct experience. You're remembering what horses never forgot. You're coming back to reality. And share this understanding, not by preaching, but by embodying. When you're present, people notice. When you're grounded in direct experience, it's palpable. Your presence becomes an invitation for others to drop out of their abstractions and into reality. Watts believed transformation is contagious, that one person waking up to presence affects everyone around them, that we don't need everyone to awaken, just enough to reach critical mass. And we might be closer than we think. The suffering is widespread enough. The disconnection is obvious enough. The search for something real is desperate enough. All it takes is enough people choosing presence over abstraction, direct experience over conceptual understanding, being over thinking. The horses are here. They've been here all along, waiting for us to be ready, to be desperate enough, to be open enough. And now, finally, we're ready. The prophecy Watts gave us isn't about doom. It's about return. Return to what we always were, beneath the layers of abstraction. Return to embodied, present, grounded consciousness. And the horses are guiding the way, not by taking us somewhere new, but by reminding us of what we forgot, not by adding something, but by helping us release what was never ours to begin with. The abstract identity, the mental constructions, the constant thinking that separates us from life itself. You made it here, not by accident. Watts' words found you because something in you was ready to hear them, ready to question the abstract life, ready to return to direct experience. So here's the final invitation. Stop thinking about presence. Be present. Stop thinking about horses. Be with horses. Stop thinking about transformation. Transform. The only moment that exists is this one. The only reality is what's actually here. The only consciousness is what you are right now, beneath all the thoughts. Watts saw that we would forget this completely, and he saw that horses would help us remember that prophecy is manifesting now in equine therapy centers, in corporate leadership programs, in spiritual retreats, in spontaneous moments of connection between humans and horses happening everywhere. The question is, will you be part of it? Will you let the horses teach you what Alan Watts knew they could teach? Will you return to direct experience after a lifetime of abstraction? The choice is yours. It's always been yours. And the horses, patient as they've always been, are waiting. Not with judgment, not with expectation, just with presence. Pure, simple, unwavering presence, inviting you to drop everything else and simply be here. With them, with yourself, with reality. That's the prophecy. That's the invitation. That's the transformation available right now. All you have to do is say yes. Thank you for making it till this point. If you enjoyed this, click one of the videos at the end of the screen, and you will be sure to enjoy that even more. See you in the next video.